Well, welcome everybody. We are very, very excited to have you here today to our looking forward how to best support your working parents. Just a quick intro from me, Jodie Rosenthal. I'm the General Manager of Operations here at Circle In, and we have the wonderful Gemma Saunders with us today. Gem, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jodie. For those of you on the call who I haven't met yet, I'm Gemma Saunders. I'm the founder of Workplace Edit, and I'm also one of Circle In's resident flex experts, or flexperts, as we've shortened that to. And before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming from today, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Just in the theme of today's webinar, I actually wanted to also just pay my respects to all of the kinship carers within the First Nations communities as well. I think it's a really relevant topic, and in fact, my first invitation to you all, as well as understanding what lands you're coming from today, and feel free to share that in the chat. One of my first invitations to you today is to really critically review some of your workplace policies and some of the language you use in your parental leave policies, and just see how inclusive you are of kinship caring arrangements. I think that's something that's quite often overlooked, and if there's one tip that I can give within 1 minute of starting, it would be just to go away and just really consider, do you understand what kinship looks like, understand how that operates from a First Nations perspective, and make sure that you have got those inclusions in your policies. So that's one thing to kick off with that's super practical, Jodie. I told you I'd give some tips, so
absolutely,
that's that one.
That's what the people are here for, Gem, and right. You always deliver. So thank you so much for that. Well, it's probably a good kind of next step in terms of, you know, I guess setting the expectations of what you can expect from this particular session. What we want you to get out of this is practical tips and takeaways that you can take to your teams, use for yourself, apply. We all know what the research says, and as a business, we're here to get things moving. We want things to actually happen, make a difference to your teams, and help you better support your parents and carers. That's why also this session is not going to be the 7 levels of hell by PowerPoint. Gemma and I both like a chat, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to have a chat, give you some key plays, tools, things that you can apply. We're also going to run a few polls at the outset of kind of going into talking about the specific areas of support, because we'd love to hear from you. That's going to help us shape the conversation and make sure that we deliver as much value as possible within the session. And most importantly, as Gem said, you know, lob some questions at us, get a chat going, you know, share some, you know, tips and tricks or challenges with your peers that are going to be in the group, you know, because obviously you're here, it's a lunchtime, we want to really get deliver the most out of the session for you as possible. So on that note, we're going to get rid of the PowerPoint. Yay, it's gone. And we're going to kick off. Gem's going to talk to us about a few steps. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll kick off with a poll. So the question is, and our specialist in the back end will bring up the poll shortly, is does everyone in your company have access to some form of flexible working? And then Gem's going to talk about evaluating your flex strategy. So it's about 20 seconds or so. Feel free, just a yes or no. Let's get a sense where everyone's at the moment, and then we can go from there. I feel we need some thinking music, like, you know, some Jeopardy music or something along those lines. But yeah, really interested to see kind of, you know, the world has changed quite significantly, and let's see if it's a high yes or if it's might be still a 50-50 or so. Excellent. Poll is closed. Wow.
Right. Okay, awesome. Well, with that high level of answer, I'm really expecting some people to offer some of their insights throughout the conversation. So feel free to jump in, as we've mentioned. I think what's really interesting about the word flexible working is that I think there's a real opportunity first and foremost for organizations to define what they mean by flexible working. I often hear people talk about flexible working, and then after a few elements of the conversation, I realize they're actually talking about remote working, and they're talking about working from home. And actually right now, what they're talking about is working from home during a pandemic, which is not true flexible working in all its glory. So I think the first opportunity for organizations is to think about, what do you mean by flexible working in your organization? Or maybe you're using other terms like work-life integration or new ways of working. It really doesn't matter what term you're using, as long as you take the steps to define it so that it's understandable for your people. So if you mean remote working, or if you mean work from home options, really talk about what you mean by those things. So I think that's the first call out. The next thing I wanted to raise was this idea of flexible working being really a strategic enabler for organizations. So I think historically we've thought about it as a workplace perk or a benefit or something that we could really leverage as part of our EVP. And that is all true. There is so much research that tells us that having access to flexible working is a real motivator for people when they're looking for a role and when they're looking to decide whether they're going to stay or leave an organization. So it definitely still is a perk, but I am encouraging people to sort of elevate that conversation, because what we have seen throughout COVID is the organizations that were operating flexible workforce models for many years, they were the ones who experienced the least lag time in terms of being able to continue business as usual operations, or business is not quite as usual, but they were still able to service some of their customers and flex their operations. And so I'm really encouraging people to elevate the conversation to one that asks, what is the role of flexible working in alignment with our business strategy? So just take Circle In as an example, and the work that we did recently around flexibility and ways of working. We identified that there was a need for people to work outside of a sort of a 9 to 5, whether it's a written or an unwritten rule, but this sort of 9 to 5 is our guiding principle for what the hours that we work. So we did some work to really expand what the hours of work could be at Circle In. And when we look at some of the strategic goals, Circle In is now working with more global companies. That means more time zones and more geographies to consider. So if we've got a couple of people in the customer success team who want to work early in the morning, that's great because they can pick up the US calls. And then we've got some people who are in the evening and prefer to log on at 11 and work through till 7 p.m. That's great because they can pick up the early morning birds in the UK that are waking up there, and they can connect with customers. So I think really looking at this as a strategic enabler of where you're taking your company strategy and how it will support you to have a more flexible and adaptable business is a really, first of all, strategic positioning is really important. So that's the first thing. And the other couple of tips I'd say on flexible working are, so define what flexibility is, make it strategic in the context of what your business is looking likely to do in the next couple of years. And then I think the final point is really, we'll talk about this a bit more, but the role of managers and leaders, and how do we equip and enable them to lead flexible teams? Because some of the research that we've looked at is, doesn't matter what the survey is, but it's around the 70% of people who say that their experience of flexible working is really determined by their manager, whether there's trust, whether there's permission, and how they really have that interaction with their manager. So I would think keep it strategic, empower and equip leaders and teams, and think about this as a whole of business approach rather than just a workplace policy or perk.
Absolutely. And probably just to add to that, I think one of the most important things that we did as an organisation, besides working with Gemma, because she's an absolute gun at this, was we actually engaged our employees. So instead of just kind of rolling out a strategy and going, cool, we're doing the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and this is how we're going to work, these are our collaboration hours, this is kind of our principles and our people promise, we asked our people and they helped us shape that. And I think getting that buy-in then just means that everyone kind of creates this together, and there's a lot more value in that than just kind of rolling something out without engaging the people in your organization who are the ones who are going to be impacted by that. And we've tried different things, and I think it's agile and it continues to evolve and meets the needs of the organization kind of as we evolve as well. But I think that was really a really key step, Jem, was actually reaching out and getting that feedback and having those sessions, and then putting the framework around it, which you did, which was extremely helpful. I think the other thing as well, and we'll probably talk about it when we talk about managers, is we actually have someone returning to work in our organisation at the moment, and so we're kind of going through that, and it's been very interesting as a manager. kind of taking that on and seeing the things that we need to consider around employee experience. I think the next thing that we'll talk about is around actually monitoring participation in flexibility and diversity programs. So before we do that, we might kick off another little poll. So Caitlin, who's in our back end, will pop that in. And this is around, do you have a measurement strategy to understand the experience of people on parental leave? Which is a super, super important question, and obviously kind of speaks to what Gemma's going to take us through shortly. So we all know measurement is key. We always want to know kind of what our outcomes are, because it's fine to do stuff, but what's the impact and how do we understand that, particularly with people who are on parental leave, probably not necessarily connected to the organisation. So we'll see what those results come up with. It was 93% last time on yes, so let's see how we go with this one. Insert Jeopardy music. And the results are drum roll. Wow.
Yeah, it's that's not surprising. I think this is an area of opportunity for a lot of HR teams, is to really understand how people who take parental leave and those who've returned from parental leave as well are experiencing the workplace and how they feel, their sentiment towards the company. So, we've talked a little bit about flexible working. We're now talking a little bit more in the detail of parental leave, and we've made that sort of transition into that space. Really, when we talk about measurement strategies, I think there's just a really good opportunity for companies to look at what are you measuring when it comes to your employee experience and what matters to you and how do you measure that. So a number of companies will still do an annual engagement survey. Some are doing more regular pulses. They might do an engagement survey, an onboarding survey for new hires. There's kind of it's kind of like a measurement strategy that might be loosely organized but not really put together. So I think there's a real good opportunity, first of all, to look at what you are measuring and the questions that you're asking, and understand, first of all, what the legal repercussions are for asking questions at certain points as well. So I think always take a legal and a privacy baseline to some of these questions and when you ask them. I think when it comes to parental leave, what we're seeing quite mature organizations do is understand that whilst only 3 to 5% of your workforce might take parental leave in any given year, it is really a moment that really does matter. It's highly memorable. It's attached to something that people look back on and say is maybe the most painful day, but the best day of their life. And so it's really attached to a memorable moment emotionally. So because it is that memorable, it's really important for organizations to consider what is the experience they want to create for people who are going on parental leave. Further to that, it is also a time where we know that people feel quite unsupported and a lot of assumptions are made. So what we can do is we can use things like Circle In, for example, to really build an experience around parental leave and to consider then not only how do people feel, but also how many people are coming back to the organization and how many are choosing not to come back. So I think that's one of the first measurements, is how many people take parental leave per year, and can we analyze that by gender? That will really tell us if we're also encouraging male participation in parental leave. We know that in Australia, 95% of paid primary carers leave is actually taken by women, so only 5% is taken by men. And I know from doing a lot of focus groups with men is that they want to take the leave, but there are they're unsure of policy, what they can take. There's stigma around it. There are some barriers. So we really want to shift that and encourage more male participation in parental leave. So I think first and foremost, who takes parental leave? What does that look like by gender? Then looking at how many people are returning from parental leave. And a lot of this you can do through your standard HRIS systems. And then looking at what is the retention rate of people 12 months on from returning, because that was an area at a previous organization where we really found that it was impacting our female talent pipeline, because we were bringing, even the people that came back, they were they weren't having a great experience in that 12 months of returning. The re-onboarding hadn't really been paid attention to in a way that it should have been. So there are some statistics that you can look at through some of your internal systems. And because you typically use payroll systems to track if someone's on parental leave, you should at a baseline be able to access some of that. I guess the next level of maturity would be to think about how are you measuring the actual experience? How do people feel? You can tell where they are and whether they're coming back or not, but how are they actually feeling? So adding a question to your engagement survey, demographic questions that asks people if they have returned from parental leave in the last 12 months, is a great way of you being able to dice that information if your organization is large enough to get a sample of, typically 8 to 10, so that you've got the anonymous data. But if you can ask that question, you can then look at what is the experience of people who've returned from parental leave and how does that compare to other groups in our organization. So some practical tips that if you are using an engagement survey, you can go away and talk to your provider about how you might introduce that. If you're a Circle In customer listening to this, obviously there are multiple ways, and your customer success team can talk to you about some of the tools and the reporting in the system that helps you look at what the experience is and how people are engaging with content. So that's another great way within the platform.
Fantastic. And I think probably just to expand a bit on what you were saying around, particularly around surveys and an engagement piece and understanding the experience, that is something that we do work on very closely with our Circle In customers. We do provide a lot of insights and, things around subscribers and content that's viewed from our own reporting capabilities, but it's a companion piece. So we know what's happening on the platform, but what we also want to know is what the impact is on your organization as a result. And we do kind of, quarterly customer surveys or end user surveys to understand where is the value coming from. Does kind of having the support, what impact does that have on your sentiment towards your organization? Do you feel more positive? Are you a brand advocate for them? Because it has that halo effect. And, we always talk about the working relationship, albeit tumultuous one sometimes, between kind of, human resources and D&I and, marketing and communications and, the value in kind of understanding how to leverage that incredible employee experience and the impact that they can have from a wider organizational perspective is really, really critical. So all this stuff around attrition and advocacy and understanding what's happening within your workforce is super, super critical. And we certainly see that the organizations who track best are the ones who ultimately perform best. Because they know exactly what's happening and kind of what areas need to be addressed or developed. So we're all about the information and surveys, Jem. I'm totally on board.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, you mentioned it earlier. So let's talk about managers. All the research tells us that the role of the manager in this kind of process flexibility and returning to work is key. So the big question is how do we provide managers with the tools to lead effectively?
Okay. Anyone on the call have the answer to that question? I would love to make this a group discussion. No,
comments welcome.
I think the first thing to note here is that we know the role of the manager is really important. We know that even as HR or people and culture practitioners, we can take it so far with the right policies, the right kind of programs, offerings, the way we describe the behaviors we're expecting, etc. But then it does need to sort of go into the day-to-day manager to an employee experience. I think first and foremost, how we design the role of the manager is something that I think is now time to look at. So quite often the role of the manager, we are getting them to be the technical expert and the people leader and the business operations expert. And so I think just really thinking about what are the capabilities and the traits that you expect of people managers and leaders in your organization is a great starting point. So Korn Ferry recently released a report of the 5 or 6 inclusive leadership traits. And so I would say first and foremost, go and have a look at some of the research. Korn Ferry is one. There are more out there, but what are the inclusive leadership behaviors that you really want in your manager roles? How do you describe them? How do you hire for them? Are you asking interview questions that help you understand if this leader is someone who has the potential to lead in an inclusive manner? Do they build trust? Some of those really key critical things. So if you haven't got that defined, do some research. As I said, Korn Ferry have a model that you could use and adopt. And look at those behaviors and start to first of all articulate what you're expecting from a capability perspective. Build that into role design, build it into performance and reward. So in the scorecard of a leader, you'd expect them to be getting assessed somehow on those attributes. I think that's the first area to define it. And then I think it's, it's the mindset, it's the skill set, and it's the toolkit. So quite often, even if we've defined what these leadership traits are, and we really want to support leaders to step into that. So we need to help them with the right kind of tools to do that. And again, within Circle In, there are the conversation guides. There's the prompt to say, hey, Jody, Tan is coming back from leave in 6 weeks. Now might be a great time for this kind of conversation. Here's a quick guide for that. So it's how do we understand and appreciate the fact that leaders and managers are very busy, but we also know they're critical to the role of employee experience for parents and carers in the workplace. So with that in mind, how do we make it simple and real time for them to do the things that they need to do with the information we've got about how people experience parental leave, which is why I love the nudges with Circle In, because as a leader, you can try and use your diary and sort of plan all that out, but things get overlooked and overbooked. And so just having that nudge to say, now's the time for this kind of conversation, it really helps. And just having a place that you can go to quickly research a checklist for someone's going on leave, checklist, like, what do I need to make sure I'm doing? Do I take all their devices off of them? Oh no, maybe I just ask them, give them the choice and say, okay, there's a checklist here. What would you like to do with staying in touch while you're away? Okay, we'll put that in place for you, rather than making the assumption. So yeah, I think define the capabilities and hire for them and reward and recognize them. And then I think just make sure that you've got some really practical tools to support leaders in the moments and interactions that really matter to parents and carers in the workplace. They would be my core tips, but again, really interested in the rest of the group. If anyone's got any examples of how they've done that, would really welcome that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Beatrice has just thrown in some adaptability, empathy, and inclusive mindset. Good listener. So I think we see it. There's a lot of just, I guess, just being a good person and considering that someone else is going through an experience that might be challenging and somewhat difficult in transition, and just being really present and available. Jem, you mentioned that we actually have a return to work in progress at the moment. Our head of content, Tan, has been away on parental leave for 14 months, and this is her first full week back. She popped in last week, and we had a couple of keeping in touch days as well. But certainly, from a manager's perspective, I like to think that I'm very, kind of conscious of all the things that we need to do as a manager to make sure that, this person has a wonderful return to work experience. But having said that, I did use the Circle In manager resources for return to work, and it was amazing how my good intentions got me about 70% of the way. There was probably at least a good few points, some of them more around the emotional experience and being mindful of what would have changed for Tan. Things that to be mindful of, that, it's a really difficult transition, to even some of the practical things about, making sure that I notify payroll that she's coming back and what day she's coming back so we can pay her. So there were some really interesting things, I think, that just sparked for me as a manager, going like, it's okay to ask for help. It's necessary to have those resources in place as well. And we had a welcome back morning tea for her today officially. So it's been really fantastic for me as a manager to kind of have accesses to that resource. And the other thing that I did is, I'm not a parent. Well, I have 2 fur babies, but they're very low maintenance. The other thing that I did is I actually reached out to a couple of people within our organisation who had been on parental leave and returned to work, to understand their experience. What did they go through? What were some of the feelings that they had? What was most challenging for them, to really understand how I could support Tan coming back to work. So I think there's also, you don't have to do it alone. And as an organisation, if you're encouraging that support and encouraging those conversations, ultimately, you're going to create a really fantastic experience for your employee returning.
Absolutely. So. And some of that's quite vulnerable for leaders, showing up when you're not quite sure how you can control the outcome, but you're showing up anyway. I think they're really important factors to consider. I like Sam's point on the chat, which is around kind of not just coaching the employee, which is really important to give them that support. And I know that even on some of the webinars that have been in the evenings, and I've seen some of the parents from the Circle In organizations show up and they get a sense of community just from that aspect. So I think that, how do you create a sense of community and provide someone with the support whilst they're on leave, coaching, the platform, etc. But also Sam's point is not just the employee. So I've also seen organizations who provide that support to the manager to make sure that they're coached and supported through that as well, which I know that there's just so much through the platform that gives those prompts and those coaching little pieces of advice. And I think it's super scalable with Circle In, and coaching can really support. I know that some organizations find that one-on-one coaching at the numbers that they've got isn't an affordable solution, but it can be a great option. And if you can look at that coaching arrangement in a way that meets your budget needs, then definitely worth exploring.
Definitely. And Sandra's just also put a point in there, which is one of those really kind of practical, it's a practical and empathy piece here, which is that, helping managers understand how to manage the workload expectations from the person who's returning to work. So I like her quote. She feels like really they want to help, but they trying to get them to understand that the workload is crazy. And, for some people, potentially it's, it's a first time parent and they're really just figuring out how to balance this whole kind of crazy struggle in new world. And I think, particularly, Tan's been away for 14 months and, there's been so much change. It's not like she's coming back into the same role in the same business. So, managing the workload, I think is a key component. Do you have any kind of tips around that, Jem?
Yeah, I think one thing would be to be aware that anyone who is returning, they, a couple of things, how much context have they missed about the business and the relationship? So they may be coming back and they may be thinking, that was our CFO before, they've gone, my contact in procurement where I did all my contracts, they've gone. So it's really, how do we help them come up to speed on the context that they've missed and the relationships that they need to have right now? Not making any assumptions around how their role was done 12 months ago compared to how it was done now. So systems, practices, etc., bring them up to speed on that. But I think the key tip I would give is to not make any assumptions and actually just ask questions, because I think I've heard from parents who've come back and have been immediately overwhelmed, and their leader says, great, you're back, here's everything, go, go, go. And then I've heard the flip side, which is I came back and it was like crickets, tumbleweed. They were like, go easy on her, she's come back from parental leave. And then 3 months in, they're saying to me, I don't know how to navigate this, but I'm so bored. I'm putting my child in daycare, I'm paying for it, I miss them, and I'm sat there doing duties that I could have done 5 years ago in my career. And how do I accelerate that conversation so that my leader knows that I'm ready to take that step up? And some of it, because you've lost a bit of confidence, navigating those conversations can feel quite hard. So again, heaps of guides within the Circle In platform that help you with those kind of conversations. But I think for leaders, just don't make any assumptions and just always invite an open line of communication. So I'm going to go at this speed with passing work back to you. If it gets too fast or too slow, come to me and we'll dial that up or down. Let's just work with an open line of communication, I think helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that we also know is a huge kind of impact from people returning from parental leave is also confidence levels, and all the stuff you're talking about there. And things have changed, or they're not getting the support that they need, or there's an expectation they're just doing the same role or the role that was 5 years ago. That has a really emotional impact on someone who's returning back to work. So that consciousness of understanding what they're going through in having that conversation, I think it becomes even more important then within that context.
Yeah, and I think it is that point around confidence as well. Is a really great article I shared a few days ago on LinkedIn around kind of confidence and imposter syndrome. And I think what's really important to note here is that it's the signals and the experiences that happen because of the systems around us that erode our confidence. It's not that we just need to, lean in and get better and get over it. It's recognizing that there have been some signals that, even things like, am I worried that the person replacing me is going to do a better job? Right. So these are the sort of things that come up as the fears and concerns of people going on parental leave. So it's recognizing, and the manager, I think, understanding some of the fears and concerns, not trying to immediately solve for them, but just be aware that they're present, and then put it back, as I say, with the employee around, I'm here, I really want to support your return to work. Here's how I've planned things out. How would you like to see this? I've given it some thought, but let's co-design it. Let's work it through. And if it's not going to plan, your experience really matters to me. So I will always create space to have a chat with you. If you're feeling overwhelmed, underwhelmed, confused, concerned, whatever those feelings are, just shoot me a text and we'll hop on a call, or whatever that is. So I think it's just setting some boundaries and some parameters to acknowledge that, you know, this world around us isn't always easy for people on parental leave. You know, might have been in your career for 15 years and you put a lot of worth around your contribution as an employee, and then all of a sudden you're away from that for 12 months, and that can feel like a part of you is missing. Maybe I'm projecting because I'm kind of my own experience, but you know, that is a reality for a lot of people. So even just acknowledging some of the experiences and being there can kind of help.
Absolutely. I mean, Bee's just made a good point there around, you know, having a buddy, like a working parent, you know, someone who might have gone through the same process, and having that support. And we talk a lot about the importance, you know, kind of ERG groups that circle in, and really the, you know, particularly from a parental perspective or carers, of having that community group internally within the organisation, because at least it's another form of support in that area. So it's another great, that's right, they do. I might also just call out that we, you know, I think it'll be on Monday. You will be, everyone who's attended the session will get an email with the recording of this live session, as well as a free downloadable resource. So some of the key points that Gemma has spoken through today, all those practical tips and things that you can do tomorrow if you wanted to, will be coming through as well. So just keep an eye out for that. We might move on then to our last point, Gem, because we'll probably have a good 10-minute chat about that, and then I'd love to leave some more time for questions. And we're loving all the comments and the statements. Keep them coming. We love having a chat. It's like the Australian version of The View right here. So we're going to talk about leadership capabilities, but before we do that, we're going to have a poll. That's right. So Katie, if we could get that up. The poll here is, have you embedded inclusive leadership traits into the role design of management roles? So it's a big, interesting distinction between, you know, there's leadership and management.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I think that, you know, I think organizations, you know, typically talk about leadership and management, and they're different things. And I think that's an interesting and important distinction. I think anyone who, for me, a leader or a manager is anyone that leads or manages people or processes, right? So I think if you've got a role in your organization, whether it's called a lead, a manager, a leader, ultimately what we're talking about is people that have the courage, particularly with this, around you know, leading others, leading other people, sometimes leading other processes as well. But, you know, with this experience in mind, parents and carers, we're talking about people who have responsibility in the leadership of people. I think tasks get managed and people get led. So really great to see that some organizations, people on the call here, have actually embedded those traits into role design and hiring, and really look at those. And I think that's an important aspect. And we've covered a little bit about that already in terms of what those traits are. There's a link in the chat function for the Korn Ferry Inclusive Leadership Traits, if anyone is looking to do that in their organization, to really articulate what those capabilities and what those behaviors look like in action. So you can hop in and have a look at that for inspiration. And I think it's just a really overlooked area sometimes, is we give people the space to step into roles with management and leadership responsibilities, but we don't really define what those aspects are that we're expecting from them. So I think we can define them clearly, then we can manage them accordingly. So I think that's the final point, is really around those capabilities, and then just the tools, the practical tools that help people have these. And I think the number one thing that we talk about here is just having real and sometimes difficult conversations, courageous conversations, where I know on our customer call at the end of last year, JR, we had one of your customers talk about an employee who had experienced a stillbirth, and that they were able to, the manager came to the HR leader and said, I this has happened and I want to be supportive. I've never experienced this before myself. I don't know what to do. I want to do the right thing, and I'm scared I might stuff it up, and I don't want to, you know, make an emotional experience, you know, feel worse than it needs to be. What do I do? Right. And so I think it's the what do I do that we sometimes overlook. I think, oh, they've got the capabilities to have difficult conversations, but that conversation, maybe some tips is really what they need, a conversation guide. And it was great to hear that within a few hours that they were able to get a really succinct conversation guide. That leader then went on to have that conversation with the employee, who said that they felt super supported, so supported that they felt the confidence and the trust and the psychological safety to share their story with other colleagues. And I think that just goes to show the power of giving really practical tools and guides to leaders, in addition to making sure that you're assessing and developing their capabilities more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also brings to light that, we talk about as an organisation, Circle In, we're about all family types and all family constructs, and we need to be there to help our kind of partners support their parents and carers during the moments that matter. And sometimes they're great moments, and sometimes they can be really tough. So
yeah,
the approach that we take is also, it's around specialised content. Like we're actually running an incredible, what we're hoping will be a groundbreaking piece of research around menopause support, because there's just nothing out there. What about people who are going through IVF or surrogacy or adoption, or, there's always, I think there's within some of the scope of what people have skills to manage, it can be hard, knowing kind of, the scope and understanding all of these different facets. So, our goal as an organisation is to really empower people within the HR function to feel enabled and have that knowledge and that confidence to know that they're having the right conversations because they've got the right information. And just, the impact of that. And like, imagine just that person's experience as one individual in an organisation of having the worst moment potentially of their life, and to have such a great experience within their organisation. They're never going to forget that.
You're never going to forget it. I remember we, just for everyone on the call, so you know who I am, I'm married to a woman, and we've got 2 children. And with baby number 2, it was, I think, like IVF round number 6. And I remember, coming back to work and saying that, it was, I just heard that it wasn't successful. And, I remember my leader saying, do you actually need to be here this afternoon? Like, do you want to be here, and do you need to be here? Because if you want to be here because it's the distraction that you need, great. If you don't want to be here because you want to take some space, then let's reshuffle your workload. Let's look at what we can do there for you. So I think, first of all, having the trust to say that didn't work and I'm feeling a bit flat about it. There's the baseline of psychological safety that people don't always have to have those conversations. And I think the next point is, is the leader equipped to say, again, what are the options? Rather than go home, don't be here. It's sort of that choice, what do you want and need right now, and what can we do to support you? And they are the moment, like I remember that from years ago.
Yeah, and it stays with you. It really does. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's this. I guess we could talk about this for hours, but we do have an hour, and I'm mindful that we've got about 20 minutes or so left. I did want to do a very quick call out, and I might just pop back to the deck for a minute here. This is everything that we've discussed today. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be a free resource that'll be coming your way around Monday, as well as a link to the video. We're really passionate about supporting parents and carers at Circle In. If you think there's a way that we can help or, kind of work together, please let us know. Our platform is continuing to evolve. We've got some really exciting developments and a new user experience coming up later this year. So if you're keen to find out what we're doing and how we can help, then please let us know. We work with a good amount of organisations. There's some incredible brands in here who are really progressive and really want to support their parents. So, join our family. You'll be in good company, and we'd love to have a chat to you about kind of how we can help. And as I mentioned, this is the downloadable resource that'll be coming your way. It has all the key points that Gemma discussed today, and hopefully, there's something that you'll be able to take away from that. And if you do want more information, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to have the conversation. So that's everything from us. We do have 20 minutes. As you can see, Gemma and I love to talk, but we'd love to hear from you. If you want to, I think Katie can unmute you, or, if you want to pop a question in the chat, then please let us know, because we'd love to continue the conversation. We also have a Circle In Slack channel as well. So Katie, if you can pop the link in there, if anyone would like to join and kind of join the discussion, we have lots of chats kind of similar to this around how we can support each other. It's designed as a peer-to-peer HR network. So we've actually had a great question last week in the Slack channel. One of our partners asked about if anyone had a policy to support someone going through gender transition. And Jem actually had some fantastic resources to share, but we also had 2 other customers that we work with, one who'd kind of put together a full policy and was happy to connect. So it's a fantastic place to find your people, and join your community, and kind of, you know, have some great conversations about how you can collectively support your working parents errors. So we've got one more poll that Katie's popped up in there. You know, we're always open to feedback about what you think is going to be of value from a Circle In perspective. So if there's anything in particular that you'd like to learn more about in our next webinar, whether it's supporting parents returning to work, parents of children with special needs, or even supporting caregivers, which is a significant part of what we offer in our platform as well, then please let us know, because we will then deliver the goods, as we say. Excellent. Yeah, just I can't see any questions popping up at this stage. Any last thoughts, Jem? Is there any, I mean, we've talked a lot about what we can do. I might kind of throw you a bit of a curly one and go, what do you find are the challenges? What are the barriers to actually, and this is all great stuff. What are the challenges that, you know, kind of some of our attendees might come across?
I think that some of the challenges, and would love to hear if others have challenges around, first and foremost, I guess the business case. Why should we even support parents and carers at the next level? You know, why focus on that group? I think, you know, for me, building the business case around this is a couple of points spring to mind. One is that whilst only 3 to 5% of people may take parental leave, it's a memorable moment. The second part is that we know that about 89% of people will become parents and or caregivers in their lifetime. So this is it's a diversity and inclusion approach. But in terms of the breadth of people that it supports, it can actually go really far. And it's people that are also considering starting a family as well, that can access the, you know, whether it's Circle In, or, you know, the reason for it is people might be exploring that. They might be having a baby right now, or just returned, or they may be a parent or carer of someone who is a child, a teenager, or an elderly parent. So I think just the breadth of, if we focus on parents and carers, it's actually, you know, it's good for business from an intersectional inclusion lens. So we can also tackle topics of gender equality through this. So for example, male participation in flexible working and parental leave. You know, 75% of unpaid caregiving in the home globally is done by women. And we really want to shift that, because that is one of the barriers that is cited for, you know, for women saying that they just don't want to take on the next level of responsibility, because how can they do that when they've got everything in the home to do? So if we can start encouraging and reducing the stigma of men taking leave and, you know, leaving out loud, picking the kids up, all of those things, then that's an important factor for gender equality in the workplace as well. So I think building your business case around some numbers, some insights, and what you know already matters to your company. And for a lot of Australian-based companies, gender equality is probably, you know, sometimes it's the limit of their D&I conversations right now. So hook into that and make this an argument for how that supports gender equality more broadly. I think the other point that you've made is around brand advocacy. I know that a number of your statistics, you know, some of your clients cite that 100% of people who experience Circle In are more likely to recommend the company. So you can either look at that as a talent brand play, and the fact that that's a really good investment. If you invest in the experience, then the brand is paid for, you know, outright. That all you need to do is to tell them how to share those job ads, and they will be recommending like no tomorrow. And the second point around brand advocacy is probably the point around consumer brand advocacy as well. So also being an advocate of your retail facing or consumer brand. So I think build the business case. Sometimes it doesn't get legs, and they say, oh, it's another one of those diversity areas, and why that one? Why aren't we doing enough in this space? But, you know, parents and carers are people with disabilities. Parents and carers are queer people, part of the LGBTIQ plus community. We've got culturally diverse, ethnically diverse parents and carers. And, you know, we build content with all of that in mind. I know I've certainly written some great content around, you know, the considerations for same-sex parenting as well. So I think this is a really nice intersectional way of building a business case. So would highly advocate that. That's often a barrier And yeah, I think the other thing is measurement. So hopefully with some of the tips today, people can go away and think, well, how might we measure this investment? Because if they can't demonstrate ROI, they might not get it across the line. But we can certainly look at measurement and ROI with the right approach in place.
Absolutely. And we do have one last result from our poll. So supporting parents returning to work is still a big focus, followed by supporting caregivers and then supporting children with special needs as well. All areas that as an organisation we have resources for, and we actually have some specifically for our customers, a lot of that content being created in the next couple of months to support them in really kind of supporting those areas. But I think the point that you make around intersectionality is key. You know, I had a conversation last year, I won't kind of tell you who it was with, what organisation or what person, but the crux of the conversation was like, oh, we're finished investing in gender diversity for this year and we're going to move to, you know, same-sex LGBTI support, and then the next year is going to be people of colour. And it's just like that,
we are not
doesn't work that way.
We are more than one thing.
Exactly. And I just think, you know, sometimes it's and I think particularly in getting stakeholder buy-in, to your point, that I guess that business case and that rationale around going, this is not just one thing. You know, the support and the positive impact for individuals is significant, and the impact from a business perspective is also going to be significant. You know, we see, and you've mentioned a couple of things. The one thing in particular that constantly comes through is organisations that have great return to work experiences also have a very high level of women in senior leadership, because they're not losing women in the organisation. They're holding on to that IP and they're progressing women and they're sponsoring them through the organisation. And that has a huge impact, and particularly around you know, we talked a lot of our customers about, you know, their WGEA members or they're members of, like, you know, the DCA, and, you know, what we do really kind of helps them to kind of meet those requirements.
Completely.
There's
a number in whether it's in the WGEA employer of choice citation or whether it's the compliance reporting, but I can definitely see how Circle In actually hits on a few of those points in both of those indexes, as well as some of the other broader ones. One thing I just wanted to add for those who are still with us, and we've kept a few people hanging on here, so I'll keep talking very briefly, but is this argument that sometimes comes up that, you know, not everyone's a parent and carer, and why do we need to really, like, it's a choice to have a baby. Do we really need to like focus on that over other things that maybe aren't so choice driven? That is something that comes up. I think that the examples where I've seen this done really well is when organizations do think about parents and caregivers and do expand that. So there's so much of the content on Circle In that you don't need to be identify as a parent of a young child or a new child to get value from the portal and the access. So a colleague I worked with was child-free by choice, but was a really active caregiver for her sister, who's a single parent, right? And so she would do the school pick up a few times a week. She would then spend a couple of hours with her niece, go for ice cream, go to the park, hang out, and then would log back on and just do a couple of hours work that evening. So she had a flexible work arrangement where a couple of days we would just, you know, change that arrangement so she could pick up her niece and play that role. Now, she wasn't a parent, but she was playing an active role in a young person's life. And I think that that's where we need to start getting more sophisticated with how we think about this and about the contribution, and also just the context of, as I said, Australia and some of those statistics around it's one of the lowest OECD countries in terms of male participation in parental leave. And so, you know, we need to start having this conversation that says we want to bring not only our company up to date as an inclusive employer, but we also want to drive a conversation around the importance of caregiving in the broader economy, and, you know, how that supports, you know, economic growth and all those other factors that execs love to talk about. So we're happy to go there with them and have that conversation. And I don't really know many people who don't have children, if they've got access to things like the wellbeing portal that you can access and get some great tips around, you know, how to deal with anxiety. The tips are broad, like whether you've got children or not. So this is there's something for everyone if you do it well. And I don't really know that many people who have just created so much backlash against people who have children. In fact, if you do, I think that's where your cultural values need to hold true and say that's why we're supporting people who are caregiving, and this is why we think it's important at a values and at a belief level.
Absolutely. Well, look, I'm a very proud auntie. I'm obsessed with my little niece who's 7 months, and there's nothing that gives me greater joy than being able to finish a little bit early on a Friday and go and bath her and give her a bottle and read her a story and put her to bed. It's often the highlight of my week. So as you say, it's really about understanding all that flexibility. So yeah, we do actually have a question that came in from Sam through the Q&A. Hi Sam, welcome. Sam's question is, we talked a lot about parental leave. Yes, we did. Can you share some tools of how to support working parents beyond parental leave, for example, school holiday periods?
Oh, yes, Sam. Yeah, I've got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, so now I'm very much in that sphere of the conversation you're talking about, which is working parents more broadly. I think, even the recent download you did around return to school checklist,
yes.
There's some really simple things that, not every parent is organized. I'm not organized. So having some practical things that I can download to say, what's my return to school checklist look like, to help people out, even showcasing stories of parents who have worked flexibly on the first day of school and are on Slack and Yammer sharing photos of the school drop-off after we've been homeschooling and finally the kid gets back to school. So some of it's, I think, Sam, is the stories of parents with older children. I know we had one on a webinar on dealing with childhood anxiety as well, and looking at, how anxiety might present itself in children and teenagers, and how we can act as parents and carers to support young people who might be experiencing anxiety. So I think that there are the tips for working parents, I think, are practical checklists through to what are the conversations that emerge based on age. And I know that the resources and support that you provide do cover those aspects. So yeah, I think supporting working parents, outside of that first, few years, I think is really important. Actually, one of the things that, Sam, just on that point, when I've done surveys before in workplaces and we've asked, are you a parent or caregiver, and they say yes, then we ask them, who is it you're primarily caring for? For people who had preschool children, they were typically more engaged, and then we asked people, and then they had school age children, and then we had people who were caring for people with disabilities, or elderly, or sick parents. And actually the elderly and sick parents were, when people were caring for those, they had the lowest engagement scores, because there wasn't really that, you don't get the baby shower, the hamper, the cute pictures of here's my 2-year-old doing this cute little thing. That sort of stuff starts to wear off. And some of the challenges in school age children, it can be things like managing divorce and blended families and separation, childhood anxiety, supporting teenagers with school pressures and that sort of thing. So I think you've made a really important point, Sam, which is, understanding the life cycle or journey of a parent, and as children kind of grow, and then thinking about what are the support mechanisms that we need to put in place at those various points. And I guess the joy of having something like Circle In is that they take care of those aspects for you, so you can confidently say to a parent and carer of caring for anyone of any age, that there's something in there that will support them. So it's not just the parental leave experience, which I think is one of the reasons I like working with you so much, is that it is broad. I think we've put the back to school checklist on the link. So for those of you who are still here, I know it's a bit late now, but it will tell you the things that you might have forgotten in the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly. But always something to refer to, because there are always going to be more school holidays and returns back to school. But yeah, look, I think that's probably a good note to wrap up on, Jem. We love working with you as well. It's always wonderful to have you and all your mind grapes and your experience, and we really appreciate you joining us today and bringing these really practical tips and having a great conversation. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you for your questions and your comments and your input. It's always lovely to have a robust conversation that's directed by you. And yeah, just as I said beforehand, have a look out for, it'll probably be around Monday that you'll get an email. It'll have the recording from today if you want to reference anything that we've discussed, and of course the free downloadable resource as well. And feel free to reach out to us if there's any more information that you need. We've popped our Circle In Slack link there, so if you want to join our Slack channel, keep the conversation going, please do so. And as well as the Working Parents Real Stories and resources are there as well. So if you wanted to check out some stories from our parent community and see how they've been tackling some of these challenges, then feel free to check it out. But thank you again, Gemma. Thank you to everyone for attending today, and good luck. The support's there if you need it. And thanks again for joining us today. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Gemma. Bye.
Cheers, bye.